Chapter 1. The Smile That Watched Too Long. The first thing everyone noticed was not the smile itself, but the feeling of being counted. For centuries she hung in that measured stillness known only to sacred spaces and tombs, where footsteps softened themselves without permission, and even breath felt like an intrusion. The walls of the Louvre rose and changed around her like aging skin, stone layered upon stone, empire upon empire, yet she remained unmoved, an island of varnish and gaze. Priests passed beneath her with lips moving in prayer, monarchs stood before her with hands folded behind their backs, and soldiers paused only briefly, uneasy in ways they could not name. Dust settled, dust returned, dust watched her too. They said her eyes followed, but that was an easy explanation, a comfort offered to children and tourists. The truth was heavier. Her eyes did not follow movement. They anticipated it. Those who lingered too long felt a strange sensation of being expected, as though the painting had already seen him arrive centuries ago and was merely confirming a prediction. At night, when the museum closed and the great doors sighed themselves shut, the room changed its posture. Silence thickened, no longer empty but listening. The guards made their rounds with keys chiming softly, radios murmuring voices from elsewhere, never staying long. None of them liked this corridor. None could say why. Don't stare. One guard whispered to another once, not looking up. I'm not, came the lie, thin as breath on glass. The painting waited. Some swore the smile deepened at night, not widened, no crude transformation, but settled, like a thought reaching its conclusion. A satisfaction so slight it could be dismissed by the rational mind, yet once seen, never unseen. Old custodians spoke of it only after wine had loosened their tongues, calling it Lecomte the counting. They claimed that every night, as shadows stretched and clocks softened their ticking, the smile sharpened its attention, as if counting the souls who stared too long. Those who worked closest learned to avert their eyes while dusting the frame. One woman, young and diligent, made the mistake of meeting that gaze directly during a midnight inventory. She froze, cloth suspended inches from the wood, heart hammering as a sensation crept over her. Not fear, not awe, but recognition. A certainty that she had been seen before, that she had stood there once already, long ago, and failed to remember it. She resigned the next morning without explanation. Time behaved strangely around the painting. Conversations dulled, hours thinned. Visitors often emerged from the room uncertain how long they had been inside. A man once checked his watch before entering, and again upon leaving, only to find nearly an hour missing. He laughed it off, but that night he dreamed of standing before an endless wall, the smile hovering just beyond reach, growing heavier with each step he took toward it. History brushed past her like a sleeve trailing incense. Revolutions rattled windows. Regimes rose and fell. Still she watched, patient as wrought. She observed men who believed themselves eternal, and children who already carried the scent of the grave. Her silence was not absence. It was restraint. When the guards turned their backs, the air around her finally breathed. It happened in the space between heartbeats, in that thin interval where vigilance relaxes and habit assumes safety. A patrol passed. Keys jingled. Shoes retreated. The room exhaled. The temperature shifted first, a subtle cooling that crept along the stone floor. Then came the pressure, like a held breath finally released. The shadows deepened, not lengthening but leaning inward, as though drawn toward the frame. The painting's surface caught the dim light, differently now, varnish glistening like damp skin. If anyone had been watching, truly watching, they might have noticed the smile settle, not change. Remember, would groan softly. The frame, ancient and ornate, trembled with a sound like an old throat clearing. The wall behind it seemed to pull away, reluctant, as though it had grown used to her weight. The air thickened with a smell not often found in galleries. Oil, age, and something faintly animal, like breath trapped in cloth. A whisper moved through the room. Not words, never words, but intention, a promise carried on absence. Elsewhere in the museum, a guard paused mid-step, hand tightening around his flashlight. "Did you hear that?" he asked the dark. The dark did not answer. Back in the room, the smile watched longer than it ever had before. It watched the door. It watched the empty space where footsteps should return. It watched the future draw closer. There was a sense, not of fear but of anticipation, like a bell drawn back before the strike. Somewhere, unseen, hands would reach for the frame. Somewhere, cloth would be wrapped tight, sealing her from light and law. Somewhere, a man would believe he was acting alone, unaware that the painting had been waiting for him across centuries, arranging this moment grain by grain. The smile did not resist. It had never needed to. As the last echo of the guard's footsteps faded completely, the room leaned closer, listening to itself. The painting seemed to darken at its edges, as though it drawing inward, preparing for motion long denied. The air shuddered once, sharply. Then the wall behind her went quiet. In that silence, thick, charged, irreversible, the smile held its count and waited to be taken, carried with it the weight of every gaze it had ever swallowed. And somewhere in the building, a key turned the wrong way. Chapter 2. The night the walls forgot her name. The Louvre did not sleep so much as it surrendered. Rain pressed its fingers against the windows, tapping in a patient, funereal rhythm, while gaslights outside bled their halos into mist like dying stars. Inside, corridors stretched and contracted with the slow breath of an ancient body at rest. Stone held memory, with remembered hands. Every wall had learned names and forgotten them again. Yet that night, the museum loosened its grip on vigilance, unaware it was about to forget the one name it had guarded longest. The guards walked their prescribed paths, boots echoing in places where echoes should not linger. Sound behaved badly after midnight. It bent corners. It arrived late. One guard swore later that his own footsteps followed him for several paces before deciding where it belonged. "Just drafts," he muttered, tightening his coat. The building did not agree. Somewhere deep within, a door sighed. Only once, then fell still. The sound was not loud enough to summon alarm, only curious enough to be remembered. Keys jingled. A radio whispered half-words from a distant room. Routine stitched itself over doubt. The Louvre slept beneath gaslight and rain, unaware it was about to lose its heart. A figure moved where no figure should have been, outlined not by stealth but by certainty. He walked as though the corridors recognized him, as though the walls leaned aside in deference. His steps were measured, unhurried, almost reverent. He did not glance at the ceilings or the corners. He did not need to. The building had already decided to let him pass. As he approached the gallery, the air changed its weight. Cold gathered low to the floor. The smell of oil and old varnish thickened, rising like breath from a sealed chest. The painting waited, though waiting was hardly the word. It had been expecting. The man stopped before her. For a moment, longer than he would ever admit. He did nothing. Rain rattled faintly through the walls. His heart beat too loudly. He felt, absurdly, as though he were interrupting something sacred and indecent. "She doesn't belong here," he whispered, the words slipping out as he practiced. The room listened. "No," he added, softer. "Not anymore." The smile did not change. It did not need to. The gaze held him, not with force, but with familiarity. He felt known, catalogued, as though his name had been written somewhere long before his birth. Footsteps echoed where none should be. Not his own. Lighter. Passing. A guard paused at the far end of the corridor, frowning at a sensation he could not explain. "Hello?" the guard called, voice dissolving into the vastness. Nothing answered. Nothing ever did. The man moved quickly then. Practice took over. The frame was heavier than expected, weight pressing into his palms like resistance. Wood creaked, a small wounded sound, as he lifted it free. It came away too easily, like a tooth already loosened by rot. A frame was lifted like a coffin lid. Behind it, the wall seemed to recoil, bare stone exposed like bone. The absence felt wrong immediately, a hollow so sudden it throbbed. The man wrapped the painting in cloth, careful, almost tender, as though tucking a child into bed. The fabric darkened where it touched the surface, drinking in centuries. As he turned, the gallery exhaled. Somewhere above, a beam shifted. Somewhere below, water dripped out of rhythm. The building shuddered, not violently, but with the slow, confused movement of something realizing it had misplaced a vital organ. The guard resumed walking, unease crawling up his spine. He passed the gallery door without looking in. He would later insist he felt watched from behind, though nothing stood there to see him. Outside, the rain thickened. The man carried the wrapped shape through corridors that no longer felt the same. Paintings seemed to watch him go, their varnished eyes reflecting dim light, like whetstones. Statues cast shadows that stretched too far, fingers brushing his sleeve as he passed. "Easy," he breathed, to himself or to the thing he carried. The thing did not answer, but the cloth warmed. By the time he reached the exit, the Louvre had begun to forget. It was subtle at first, a soft erasure. The name that had been whispered by guides and lovers and thieves alike loosened its hold on the walls. Letters fell away. Memory thinned. The gallery, once anchored by her presence, felt suddenly anonymous, as though it had never held anything of consequence at all. Dawn crept in pale and uncertain, revealing a city rinsed clean by rain. Inside the museum, the guards completed their rounds with the dull relief of another uneventful night. One of them paused before the gallery wall and frowned. "Wasn't there?" he began. His partner shrugged, probably moved for cleaning. They stood before the empty space, neither able to articulate what troubled them. The wall radiated faint warmth, like skin after fever. One guard pressed his palm against it and pulled back sharply. "Feels wrong," he said. "Everything does before coffee," came the reply. By dawn, only an empty wall remained, still warm. Visitors would arrive hours later, laughter echoing, cameras ready, only to stop short before the absence. Confusion would ripple outward, slow at first, then sharp as alarm bells. Names would be spoken and shouted and printed, trying desperately to recall what the walls had already begun to forget. Far from the Louvre, wrapped in cloth and darkness, the smile traveled. The man did not notice when the road seemed longer than it should have been, or when the silence in his carriage grew thick enough to press against his ears. He did not hear the faint sound beneath the rain, a breath not his own, patient and amused. Some things, once taken, do not leave quietly. As the city woke to shock and shouting, the empty wall cooled at last, its warmth fading into stone. Yet in that fading heat lingered a shape, an outline burned into memory, a promise that the absence would not remain empty for long. Somewhere in the dark, the cloth shifted, and the smile remembered its way home. Chapter 3. A Frame Without a Face. Laughter was the first sound to touch the wound. It rose lightly, almost politely, as visitors drifted into the gallery that morning, umbrellas still damp, coats shedding rain like old skins. They came with guidebooks folded open, with expectations rehearsed, with the soft hunger of people about to stand before something they'd been told to revere. When they saw the wall, bare and obedient, the laughter arrived as a reflex, thin, uncertain, already preparing to apologize. "Very funny," someone said. "A renovation prank?" Another guessed. "Modern art," a man scoffed, relieved to have found an explanation. The wall did not respond. It absorbed their voices the way earth absorbs rain. The frame remained ornate and empty, clinging to the stone like a ribcage stripped of its heart. Its gilded edges caught the light too eagerly, as though ashamed of what it no longer held. The space within it was wrong. Not blank, not neutral, but hollow in a way that suggested something had been torn free rather than removed. The room smelled wrong. It was not the clean sterility of museums or the dust-sweet age of old wood. This was closer, more intimate, like old breath held too long, like panic after it is cooled but not faded. Visitors wrinkled their noses without understanding why, exchanging glances that asked a question none of them wished to speak aloud. A woman leaned closer, peering into the empty frame. "Is it supposed to be warm?" she murmured. Her companion laughed again, sharper this time. "You're imagining it." But the laughter did not stay. It thinned, then fell away entirely, leaving behind a hush that pressed in from all sides. The gallery seemed to narrow, the ceiling lowering by imperceptible degrees. Sound lost its brightness. Footsteps softened, as though the floor itself wished to keep secrets. Some claimed they could still feel her gaze. A man stood perfectly still before the wall, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the bare stone. Minutes passed. People flowed around him like water around a post. When at last he spoke, his voice startled even himself. "She's still there," he whispered. His wife touched his arm. Don't be ridiculous. No, he insisted, eyes never leaving the space. She's watching from somewhere else. The stone within the frame bore faint marks, barely visible unless the light struck just right. Shadows of absence, where centuries of looking had worn the wall thin. Visitors found their eyes drawn to that center, unable to decide where to rest. Looking away felt rude. Looking too long felt dangerous. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Why does it feel like someone's staring at me?" she asked. The mother hesitated, then answered too quickly, "Because you're staring first." The guards arrived, uniforms crisp, expressions already strained. They spoke in low voices near the doorway, radios hissing like insects trapped in glass. "It was here last night," one said. "I know," another replied. "Don't say it like that." They avoided the frame, eyes sliding away from it as if from a body they were not ready to acknowledge. Orders were given, barriers erected. The room was sealed, but the feeling did not stay contained. It seeped outward, carried on whispers and glances, and a peculiar weight that settled behind the eyes of those who had stood there too long. Pinned to the bare stone. That was how it felt. Not watched, not followed, but held in place, as though something unseen pressed the soul flat, aligning it with an expectation it did not understand. Several visitors reported dizziness. One fainted. Another began to cry without knowing why, tears slipping down her face as she stared into nothing. "I can't remember her face," she sobbed. "I know I've seen it. Why can't I remember?" The name was spoken again and again, softly at first, then louder, as if volume could summon what had been lost. Guides corrected one another. Tourists argued over details that suddenly refused to settle. Was the smile sad or knowing? Was the gaze gentle or sharp? The more they spoke, the less certain they became. It was as though the painting had taken its true form with it when it left. By afternoon, the laughter was gone entirely. News spread through the building like a chill, reaching rooms far from the empty frame. Even visitors who had not yet seen the wall felt a disturbance, a subtle imbalance, like a tooth worrying the tongue. In the sealed gallery, silence grew layered and complex. It pressed against the barriers, thick enough to feel. A guard posted at the door rubbed his arms, glancing back at the frame every few minutes despite himself. "Feels like she's just out of sight," he muttered to no one. "Stop saying that," came the reply from down the hall. "She's not here." The guard did not answer. He was busy remembering a sensation he cannot explain. The way the space seemed to narrow when he turns back, the way the air tightened, expectant. Night returned with cruel efficiency. When the museum closed and the last footsteps faded, the gallery did not relax. It tensed. The empty frame caught moonlight and reflected it poorly, shadows pooling inside it like ink. The wall within seemed to darken, though no light had changed. A cleaning woman passed the doorway and crossed herself without realizing she had done so. Inside, the smell deepened. It was stronger now, closer to breath, closer to skin. The stone within the frame felt warmer than it should have, as though memory itself had retained heat. A single hairline crack traced downward from the center, thin and delicate, like the beginning of a smile. Somewhere far away, wrapped in cloth, the painting shifted. In the gallery, the silence shuddered. The frame creaked softly, would adjusting to an absence it had not been meant to hold. For a moment, only a moment, the air within the empty space seemed to ripple, as though something unseen had leaned forward. Those who would stand there tomorrow would swear they felt it then. A pressure behind the eyes, a gaze pressing inward, pinning thought and breath alike. The wall waited, and whatever had been taken from it was already learning how to look back. Chapter 4. Whispers in Oil and Varnish. Rumors travel faster when they are afraid of being caught. They slipped across borders folded into newspapers, murmured in taverns, traded in the pauses between official statements. Facts moved slowly, weighed down by proof and permission, but whispers ran light and unburdened. By the time authorities agreed on what had been lost, Europe had already decided what had been awakened. In Marseille, sailors began to dream the same dream. They stood on dark water beneath a sky without stars, the deck of their ship slick with mist. Somewhere below, something knocked, once, twice, like a fist wrapped in cloth. Then she appeared, A woman bound in canvas and rope, her face hidden, yet unmistakably present. The cloth around her chest rose and fell, as if she were breathing, each breath damp and patient. "Don't unwrap her," an old sailor whispered in one such dream, though no one could say where he stood. "We have to," another answered, hands already reaching. The smile beneath the cloth waited. Men woke gasping, palms slick, the taste of varnish on their tongues. They spat into the sea and crossed themselves, laughing it off by daylight. But at night the dream returned, always the same, always closer. One sailor swore he heard a woman humming from inside a sealed crate in the hold. When they opened it at dawn, it was empty and warm. Across Europe, the rumors sharpened. In Florence, art dealers spoke in voices too low for comfort. They gathered behind closed doors and heavy curtains, hands gesturing as if shaping something fragile and dangerous. A painting, they said, a masterpiece, not merely stolen, but unwilling. "She won't stay sold," one dealer muttered, swirling his wine as if divining shapes. "Nonsense," another replied. "Everything has a price." Then why does everyone who names one wake up afraid? It was said the painting resisted being sold, though no one could explain how. Contracts dissolved without reason. Buyers changed their minds overnight, claiming illness, claiming visions, claiming a sudden, unshakable sense that they were being watched from behind their own eyes. One collector locked himself in his study for 3 days and emerged pale and shaking. "She smiled at me differently," he whispered, "like she knew my name wasn't the one I was born with." The smile sharpened with each refusal. Those who glimpsed the painting, always briefly, always by accident, reported subtle changes, not in the image itself, but in the space around it. The air thickened, sound dulled, shadows leaned closer. The smile did not widen, but it gained edges definition, as if honed by denial, like a blade polished by use. In Vienna, a priest claimed the painting had passed through the city wrapped in oilcloth, carried by men who would not meet his eyes. He followed them for 3 streets before stopping short, seized by a certainty that he was no longer walking toward it, but being led by it. "It's not hiding," he told his congregation later, voice trembling. "It's traveling." Oil and varnish carried the whispers further than ink ever could. Restorers and curators spoke of disturbances in their workshops. Brushes drying too fast, pigments separating, surfaces cracking without cause. One woman swore canvas bled varnish onto floor overnight, pooling into a shape disturbingly like a smile. At night, she heard it breathe, just settling. Her colleague insisted, though he refused to stay past dusk. "Paint doesn't breathe," she replied. Neither of them laughed. The authorities denied everything, of course. Statements were issued, reassurances printed. The painting would be found. Art endures. History corrects itself. Yet even as they spoke, the rumors adapted, growing less specific and more dangerous. People began to forget details. They remembered the smile, but not the face. They remembered the gaze, but not the eyes. When asked to describe it, they faltered, words sliding off something that refused to be held. It was as though the painting, once removed from its frame, had begun shedding features, becoming an idea rather than an object. And ideas are harder to lock away. In Prague, a bookseller claimed to have seen it in the reflection of his shop window late one evening, hovering behind his own startled face. When he turned, nothing stood there, yet the glass remained warm, and his reflection smiled when he did not. "Go back," he whispered to the empty street. The street listened. The night did not. Across the continent, the same sensation took root, the feeling of being negotiated with, as though somewhere unseen hands weighed offers and refusals not in currency, but in attention. Each time the painting was denied a buyer, denied a wall, denied a resting place, something tightened within it. The smile learned patience. Sailors stopped sleeping. Dealers drank more heavily. Priests argued with their shadows. Everywhere, the whispers accumulated, layering themselves like coats of varnish, each one thin, each one sealing something in. In a narrow house with shuttered windows, the man who carried the painting finally dared to unwrap it. He did so slowly, reverently, as if approaching an altar rather than a crime. The cloth peeled away with a sound like skin separating from skin. The room smelled immediately of oil and age and something intimate, something that remembered touch. He did not look at the face at first. "I saved you," he whispered, unsure why his voice shook. The painting watched him anyway. When he finally raised his eyes, the smile met him unchanged and entirely different. Sharper, yes, more aware, as though it had learned something on the road, something it had not known while hanging quietly on a wall. He stepped back, heart hammering. "No one wants you," he said, trying to sound strong. The smile did not argue. It did not need to. That night, the rumors changed tone. They were no longer about loss or theft or recovery. They were about consequence, about a painting that moved when unobserved, about a smile that grew clearer the more it was denied, about whispers in oil and varnish that promised not vengeance, but return. Somewhere, wrapped no longer, the painting leaned into the darkness, listening to Europe speak its name in fear. And far away, an empty wall waited, cool now but expectant, for the sound of footsteps coming back the wrong way. Chapter 5. The Thief Who Carried a Curse. The first night after the taking, the man learned that silence could walk. It moved through his rented room with a patience he did not possess, pacing from wall to wall as though measuring him for something final. The rain outside had ceased, yet damp clung to the air, a cold breath settling into the corners where shadows prefer to gather. He lay on the narrow bed fully clothed, eyes open, counting the spaces between sounds, certain that if he could name them all, he might survive the night intact. The man who took her believed he was rescuing a relic, not stealing a witness. That belief had steadied his hands when he lifted the frame, had quieted the tremor in his chest when the wall released its warmth. He told himself a story again now, whispering it into the darkness like a prayer practiced too often to mean anything anymore. She belongs elsewhere. She belongs home. The words felt thinner each time he repeated them, as though something unseen were filing them down. From the adjoining room came the sound of a footstep, not loud, not urgent, merely present. He held his breath. The step came again, closer this time, stopping just beyond the door. The handle did not turn. The pause stretched, heavy and deliberate, until his pulse began to stutter. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the apology slipping out before he could decide who it was meant for. The footsteps retreated. Silence returned, thicker than before. The painting lay hidden behind a wardrobe, wrapped carefully in cloth and oilskin, bound with cord as though restraint itself were a form of respect. He had chosen a hiding place with care, convinced that darkness and distance would dull whatever power people imagined it possessed. Yet even there unseen, it altered the room. The walls leaned inward, the ceiling pressed low. The air carried the faint, unmistakable scent of varnish and something older, something that remembered hands. The smile, hidden away, never slept. By day, the man moved through the city cautiously, eyes lowered, coat collar turned high. He avoided reflections, unsettled by the way his own face seemed unfamiliar to him, as though he were wearing a borrowed expression. He bought bread. He did not taste, drank wine that burned without warmth. Everywhere, he felt followed, not by people, but by attention. At night, the pacing returned. Sometimes it circled the room. Sometimes it stopped at the wardrobe, lingering just long enough to make his skin prickle. Once, he heard it climb onto the bed, the mattress dipping as if beneath a careful weight. He did not move. He did not scream. He whispered apologies until his throat ached. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he murmured. The darkness listened. "I saved you," he insisted, voice cracking. "Didn't I?" In the early hours, he dreamed with his eyes open. He saw a gallery without walls, an endless corridor lined with empty frames. Each one radiated warmth. Each one waited. At the far end, she stood unwrapped, smile sharpened to a point of perfect stillness, watching him approach without moving an inch. "Put me down," she said, not aloud, but directly into the space behind his eyes. "I can't," he replied in the dream, hands bleeding where he held her. "You already have," the smile answered. He woke, gasping, the smell of oil thick enough to taste. On the third night, he dared to look. The wardrobe door creaked open like a confession. His hands shook as he loosened the cord, peeling back layers of cloth with the care of a man unwrapping a wound. The painting emerged slowly, catching the low light of the lamp. The face was unchanged and utterly altered. The smile seemed finer now, more precise, as though honed by denial and distance. "You're safe," he whispered. The smile watched him say it. He noticed then what he had avoided before. The eyes did not reflect the lamp. They absorbed it. The room dimmed slightly, as if light itself had been invited inside and chosen not to leave. He felt a pressure behind his temples, a familiar sensation of being counted. "I didn't steal you," he said quickly. "I listened." The painting did not contradict him. It did not need to. Its silence felt crowded with things unsaid. That night, the footsteps did not stop outside the door. They entered. The sound crossed the threshold without disturbing the handle, moving with a calm inevitability that drained the room of breath. The man sat upright, heart battering his ribs, watching shadows rearrange themselves. The steps circled the bed, then paused at his feet. He whispered apologies until the words lost shape. In the pause that followed, the lamp flickered. For an instant, the wall opposite him bloomed with an unfamiliar shadow. A woman's outline, head tilted, hands folded patiently. When the light steadied, the shadow remained a fraction longer than it should have. "Please," he said. The shadow smiled without moving. By morning, his hair had begun to gray at the temples. He avoided mirrors entirely now, afraid of what might look back. He packed hurriedly, convinced that movement might confuse whatever followed him. The painting was wrapped once more, tighter than before, though he suspected restraint only sharpened its awareness. As he carried it through narrow streets and crowded stations, he felt the weight change subtly, growing heavier when he hesitated, lighter when he obeyed impulses he did not remember forming. He spoke to it under his breath, a steady stream of justification and remorse. "I'm taking you home," he said. The bundle was warm against his chest. That night, in a different city, in a different room, the footsteps returned. They paced more slowly now, confident in their route. When he whispered apologies, they did not stop. Instead, the wardrobe door opened by itself. He watched, frozen, as the cloth loosened, as the painting leaned forward into the lamplight without being touched. The smile was no longer sharpened. It was settled, complete. The footsteps ceased. In their place came a sound like a breath being released after centuries of holding. The man understood then that he had never been the one carrying the curse. He had been carried. And somewhere far away, an empty wall stirred in its sleep, remembering the shape of what was coming back. Chapter 6. A world obsessed with an absence. Her name was spoken so often that it began to lose its edges. It appeared in ink thick as blood, stretched across front pages, shouted by boys with folded papers under their arms. Each syllable landed like a bell struck too hard, too many times. People repeated it without thinking, as one repeats a prayer learned before belief. By the third day, it no longer felt like a name at all, but an invocation. Newspapers screamed her name until it felt like a summoning spell. In cafes and train stations, in parlors heavy with smoke and rooms where sleep refused to settle, the same conversations unfurled again and again. They circled the absence like mourners around a sealed grave. How could something so watched simply vanish? Perhaps it wanted to. Don't say that. Photographs of the empty wall were printed and reprinted until the stone looked bruised. Readers traced the outline of the missing shape with their fingers, feeling an ache they could not place. The absence stared back at them with a confidence that unsettled even those who scoffed. The more she was missing, the more powerful she became. Those who had seen her once, years ago, briefly, without reverence, found the memory sharpening overnight. Details returned unbidden. The precise curve of the smile, the way the eyes refused to settle into certainty. Those who had never stood before her felt something worse. They felt recognition without memory. Across cities and borders, sleep began to thin. People dreamed of eyes, not a face, not a body. Only eyes, suspended in darkness, unblinking and patient. They did not threaten. They did not accuse. They simply watched, waiting for the dreamer to understand why they were being seen. A schoolteacher in Berlin woke each night at the same hour, convinced someone stood at the foot of her bed. She would sit up, heart racing, and whisper into the dark. "I know," she said, though she did not know what she meant. The watching did not stop. A butcher and lion dreamed of standing before an endless wall of frames, each one empty, each one warm. When he turned to flee, he found the eyes behind him, reflected in the cleaver he held. He woke with his hands clenched around nothing, palms aching as if he had carried weight too long. In Rome, a cardinal dismissed the dreams as hysteria, then woke screaming when he saw the eyes staring back from the polished surface of his chalice. The dream spread faster than any newspaper. People stopped trusting mirrors. Reflections felt delayed, expressions arriving a fraction too late. Some swore they saw the smile flicker across their own faces when they were not smiling at all. Authorities attempted order. Press conferences were held. Reassurances offered with stiff voices and folded hands. The painting would be recovered. The world would be restored to balance. Yet even as they spoke, their words felt borrowed, thin compared to the weight of what was not being said. In the margins of newspapers, readers wrote notes to one another. I dreamed of her last night. So did I. She didn't move. She didn't have to. The absence became a presence. Artists painted nothing but empty spaces. Poets wrote verses that refused to name their subject. Children sketched a smiling face they could not explain, eyes always too large, too knowing. When asked where they had seen it, they shrugged. In my head, they said, adults shuddered without understanding why. Some claimed the dreams were invitations. A man in Amsterdam packed his bags after waking with the certainty that he had been called. He boarded a train with no destination in mind, convinced that if he followed the pull behind his eyes, he would arrive where he was needed. He never returned. His apartment was found empty, except for a single newspaper clipping tacked carefully to the wall, the empty frame circled in red. She's closer than they think. Someone scrawled beneath it. Churches filled briefly, then emptied again when prayer failed to quiet the dreams. Confessionals echoed with the same whispered fear. She's looking at me. She knows me. She's waiting. People who had never believed in curses spoke of inevitability. Those who had never cared for art felt suddenly protective, possessive, as though something personal had been taken from them. Arguments broke out in public squares, voices rising not in anger, but in desperation. She belongs to everyone, one man shouted. No, another replied softly. She belongs where she chooses. The man who carried her felt the shift before anyone else named it. He moved through crowds unnoticed, the wrapped painting heavy against his chest. Every newspaper headline tightened the air around him. Every spoken name pressed into his skull like a fingertip. The dreams came for him too, though his eyes were open when they arrived. At night, he felt her attention spread outward, reaching beyond the room, beyond the city, threading itself into countless sleeping minds. The footsteps no longer paced. They no longer needed to. She's calling them, he whispered, clutching the bundle. The bundle was warm. It always was. By the seventh day, the dreams changed. The eyes began to blink. Those who woke then described the same sensation, a subtle relief, like a door finally opening. They felt less alone, less uncertain. Some smiled in their sleep, expressions too calm to be comfort. In Paris, before the empty wall, visitors stood in silence. No one laughed anymore. No one pretended. They gathered not to see, but to be near. Some reached out, fingers hovering inches from the stone. She's still here, a woman whispered. A stranger beside her nodded, just thinner. That night, the empty frame creaked. The warmth returned, faint but unmistakable, spreading to the stone like blood beneath skin. In homes across Europe, people woke with the same thought pressing gently behind their eyes. She is coming back. Somewhere on the road, the man stumbled, nearly dropping the painting as a wave of longing, not his own, washed through him. He pressed his forehead to the wrapped surface and wept, unsure whether the tears belonged to him. I can't stop it, he whispered. The smile, unseen, did not ask him to. Far away, the empty wall leaned inward, shadows deepening. Stone remembering its burden. The absence had grown too loud to sustain itself. And in the dreaming minds of thousands, the eyes turned at last toward home. Chapter 7. When the smile returned changed. She returned to the wall, like a body brought home too late. The announcement came wrapped in triumph, bells, headlines, uniforms stiff with ceremony, but the building did not celebrate. The Louvre tightened around itself, stone drawing closer to stone, as if bracing for an old pain remembered too clearly. Crates were opened with reverence, gloves drawn tight, breath held. When the glass was lowered into place and the final latch sealed, the room exhaled a sound too deep to be relief. She came back behind glass and guards, but something ancient had followed her home. The first visitors arrived in waves, disciplined by barriers and velvet rope. They spoke in hushed tones, the way people do in rooms where the dead are said to listen. Cameras were raised, lowered, raised again. The smile waited for them all, unchanged enough to be recognized, altered enough to resist certainty. "Do you see it?" a woman whispered, leaning closer than she should have. "See what?" her companion murmured. "It's narrower," she said, frowning, like it learned something sharp. The glass reflected their faces faintly, overlaying them with hers. For an instant, so brief it could be denied, the smile aligned with their mouths, barring expressions not offered. The guard stood rigid, eyes forward, hands clasped. None liked the way the room behaved now. Sounds softened near the glass, words losing weight as they approached her. Time misstepped. Watches lagged. People emerged unsure how long they had been standing, calves aching as if from kneeling. Those who stood before her longest felt watched from the inside. It began as a pressure, subtle as a change in weather, a sense that one's thoughts had acquired an audience. Visitors shifted, cleared their throats, rubbed their arms. "She's looking at me," a man said with a nervous laugh. "No, she's not," his friend replied too quickly. "Not like that," the man whispered. "From in here." He tapped his temple once, then stepped back, pale and sweating. The glass did not prevent it. If anything, it refined the sensation, focusing inward. The smile no longer seemed content to rest on the surface of the painting. It pressed forward, insinuating itself into reflections, into the space behind the eyes. People felt catalogued, weighed, measured against expectations they had never agreed to meet. At night, when the museum closed and the crowds dispersed, the room grew watchful. The guards made their rounds with careful precision. Radios turned low. None lingered. None stood directly before the glass unless required. One man, new to the post, made a mistake of meeting the gaze head-on after midnight. "She's closer," he whispered into his radio, unsure why. "Closer than what?" came the reply. "Than before." He was found later sitting on the floor, back against the opposite wall, eyes fixed on the painting, lips moving soundlessly. He was reassigned the next day without protest. The heist ended, but the haunting did not. Restorers examined the surface under controlled light, instruments precise as surgical tools. They found no damage, no alteration of pigment or varnish. Yet none could deny the change. The smile held tension now, like a thought that had learned patience. The eyes seemed deeper, as though distance had been added behind them. "It's impossible," one expert said, voice hollow. "Say it anyway," another replied. "It's the same," the first insisted, then faltered. "It's more itself." The building began to remember things it had not known before. Doors stuck. Corridors echoed with steps taken hours earlier. The empty wall where she had once been felt a constant, low ache, like a phantom limb. Sometimes, late at night, it warmed briefly, then cooled again disappointed. Visitors returned in greater numbers, drawn by relief and curiosity and something less definable. They came to reassure themselves that the world had been restored to order. They left unsettled, unable to articulate what had shifted. A child stood before the glass and smiled back. "Don't," his mother hissed, tugging him away. "Why not?" he asked. She might smile back. The child frowned. She already did. Dreams changed again. Those who slept near the museum dreamed of corridors without end, of glass walls that reflected only eyes. They dreamed of standing before her and realizing the glass was on the wrong side. They woke with the sensation of having been examined and found wanting. In distant cities, the dreams faded, but not entirely. The watching had learned restraint. It no longer needed to reach so far. Home had narrowed its focus. The man who had carried her did not intend to return. He could not. He felt the shift the moment the glass closed, a tightening in his chest like a door locking behind him. The footsteps that had followed him for weeks ceased entirely. That frightened him most of all. He stood alone in a rented room and whispered into the stillness. "You're back," he said. The stillness did not answer. In the gallery, the smile adjusted. It was subtle, the way Rod is subtle before collapse. The corners of the mouth seemed to settle into something final. Not joy, not mockery, recognition, as though the painting had completed a circuit and brought something back with it. Something old, something that did not belong to oil or canvas. Priests visited quietly. Scientists frowned. Philosophers stood too long and left with shaking hands. No explanation held. No language fit. The painting resisted interpretation the way it once resisted sale. "She's not finished," a woman whispered to her husband, gripping his sleeve. "Finished with what?" "With us." The glass began to hum. Not audibly, not yet, but with a vibration felt more than heard. Those closest stepped back instinctively, hands rising to their chests. The guards exchanged looks they would later deny sharing. In the deepest hours of night, when a museum lay folded in shadow, the smile leaned forward within its prison. The glass fogged briefly from inside, a bloom of warmth like breath against a window. For a moment, only a moment, a second smile appeared in the reflection, older, deeper, watching from behind her own. Then the glass cleared. Somewhere in the building, an alarm flickered, hesitated, and fell silent. The guards shifted uneasily, unaware why their hearts had begun to race. On the wall across from her, the stone darkened, remembering the weight it once bore. A faint outline emerged, not empty now, but waiting, an echo preparing to receive what could no longer be contained. The haunting had not followed her home. It had come back to claim the rest of the house.